It is said that the history of a people can be seen in their folk expressions, and indeed, here in Barbados, it is no different. Barbadian writer Kamau Brathwaite tells us that the root of Barbados's African heritage is found mainly in our indigenous folk traditions, such as the folk songs, tuck band, stick licking, and the landship. Through the stories of the elders in our community, we'll explore vignettes of our cultural legacy, which many of us have seen, but few may truly understand or appreciate. Throughout Africa, performance was a part of the society's social fabric. It accompanied birth, initiation, marriage, and death, thereby marking all stages of human development. Very often, performances told stories about a particular village and were very much the social commentary of the time, predating the calypso format that we know today. Folklore researcher Peggy McCreary was born and raised in Speightstown, St. Peter. She recalls some of the leisure experiences surrounding village life.
Several of those songs were put together by 3 or 4 different persons. And sometimes you also found a different version of the song. Like, for example, there is a song, a game, Roro Nanny. And you know, my mother used to play that with us. She taught me the Roro Nanny, roll bank and go. And you did it with stones. It's a rhythm game. And if you did not move those stones with the rhythm, very often your fingers would get caught between the stone and the pavement, or the stone and wherever else you were playing on. So we did this Roro Nanny. But then when I got Oystains, there was an Oystains version of the song. Roro Nanny, rowing Oystains down. Roro Nanny, rowing Oystains down. Life is Timbletop, half a drop, I gonna knock your petition down. Life is Timbletop, half a drop, I gonna knock your petition down. And I thought, well, this is so different from the one in Speightstown. Because the one in Speightstown now was a more rural thing. Roro Nanny, tell me what you gonna do. Tell me what you gonna do. Oh, my nanny, tell me what you gonna do for supper. Tell me what you gonna do for supper. Tell me what you gonna do for supper. Roast yam and butter. Completely different concept. And it left you to wonder why the one in Oystains dealt with the brevity of life. And I thought maybe because these people were fisher folk and they knew, you know, life is Timbletop. You know, Mr. Timble that you wore on your finger. Timbletop. It wasn't much. Timbletop, half a drop. I can knock your petition down. And I wondered, where is this thing about petition? Because there was another song that has something in it about a petition coming down. I don't remember the song, but there was something else. And I wondered about all of that. And, you know, there's still questions because you never know how people put songs together, what was the rationale behind them. And in many cases, they had some hidden meanings. And they didn't want to say things that sometimes children would understand. Or, you know, they hid things. And it made you really, really think about what the real meaning of that song was about.
Instrumental music, solo and choral singing and dancing were central to the social and cultural life on the plantation. Roving musicians and strolling minstrels playing artisanal homemade instruments were popular in the rural and urban districts. Scrubbers emerged out of these small roving bands in the early 20th century. Small groups of musicians would go from door to door throughout the village and the environs, singing at Christmas time mainly, although some remember them appearing at bank holiday excursions and weekend dances. Educator Louis Lynch described scrubbers as peripatetic poets, ambulatory artists who gave profusely of their unpremeditated art. This tradition reinvented itself in the 20th century, when the laws that governed movement in the streets were less restrictive. Even if there was only a box guitar and shaker, or no musical instrument except the voice, many can testify to the beautiful harmonies of Barbadian singers on street corners and walking from village to village. Calypsonian and extempo master Oliver Lord Radio Broom, who also lived in the northern port city of Speightstown, recalls his days as a scrubber.
We used to go in the Edmonton and over a flask bottle of rum or a nip bottle of rum, we'd sing. Your only payment would have been if somebody opened a corned beef or something like that, you know. But a crowd could easily walk behind you. I know for sure this extempo thing that I've picked up on, there was a small group that used to come at my aunt's shop. That was in Thomas Gap at the time. She had a shop in Richmond Gap. She moved to Thomas Gap. And every night these guys would come and sit on the shop step and sing. And I tell you about singing sweet, Ado. We would walk sometimes down to Nelson Street and walk back. No instrument. You have a guy called Shama doing bass. So when you hear the band start, the group start up, you'd hear Moma Moma Boom. Right. Boom boom. And the other and no guitar, but we sang like that, and we was able to attract a crowd.
Desmond Weeks of the Draytons too, one of the exponents of spooge, an indigenous style of music in Barbados, had similar memories of the strolling minstrels or scrubbers in the urban landscape.
The singing started with me at school. Again, or should I say on the street corner of Carnon Village. Now, in Carnon Village there, the 2nd Avenue, Nurseland, Tweedside Road, we used to gather at the corner, which some people would call the block now.
Right.
But we used to call it the street corner. It wasn't the block at that time, but it's relatively, it's same thing as the block now. So what we would do is gather every night, day, night, whatever we did, we got in groups and we sang.
The tea meeting is another example of a performance space that has the appearance of being Anglo-Saxon, which Barbadian working class people made their own. Drinking tea is considered an English social practice, although in Asia and West Africa it has been a ritual for centuries. Known traditionally as ataya, West African tea ceremonies were important social occasions where neighbors, villagers, and friends would gather to share news, camaraderie, gossip, discuss current affairs, and the like. Music, song, and eloquent oratory performances formed part of the continental tradition. In Barbados, tea meetings occurred on a Sunday evening and was a performance of song and oratory. The service of song shares many characteristics with the tea meeting, but started out with a religious motif and became more secular as the night proceeded. At both events, the Master of Ceremonies, or Chairman, hosted participants. He was known as a speechifier. Some might remember the character Brother Daddy from the Bajan Bus Stop series, who was based on the speechifier.
Mr. Maycock!
Here I am, sweet widow Scantleberry.
Oh.
Prosperous apologies. I was detained by a more demanding mistress, to wit, great Mother Nature herself. I received her call and felt obligated to respond to the nearest receptacle at hand. Ergo, I was musing your toilet.
The speechifier prepared speeches, memorized famous quotations, lines in Latin, invented new words, parodied and retold ancient stories of great battles. He was a comedian, poet, and philosopher. The use of the speech act and the singing in groups were informed by the griot in West African storytelling tradition.
Well, sir, the song was every Sunday afternoon. You will have a service song in the district, various districts. It's your choice to go. There's everyone in Kirton. But one of the beauties of the service song was not only songs, but the MCs, they called them chairman in those days, chairman. And there were 13 there were 13 chairmen, roughly in those days. I had one to each parish anyhow. One was you would know the main fellow for each parish. And but I loved singing. So I used to sing in this choir from St. Lawrence. And in those days, each plantation used to carry a manager, a bookkeeper, a supervisor, and a watchman. So the supervisor at Ballantyne was just above St. David's. Decided to hold a service on. So this crowd came down, and the policy was, or is, after each song the choir sing, the chairman is supposed to say something. My MC, the chairman, was a carpenter, as so as I am too, but he wasn't so hot. But this band, this crowd from St. John came down. We did one chairman from St. John chairman, right? And he was a school teacher or something like it, right? Educated person. I think he was a school teacher of studies. And he had my MC man getting just repeating himself, you know. So I said, man, I said, Prescott. His name was Prescott. I said, Prescott, what's going on? He said, man, I can't do no more. I said, well, after you sing this next song, you give me the wine or you stick to you to call it, you know. And as I foretold you, my mother was an orator with the Mother's Union Affairs. And I had inculcated a few of her speeches, right? As a youngster. But she reminded me that story, reminded me I was young and in certain things. Hey, after we sang this song, this chairman came up and, you know, you got to throw it with him. Regardless of what he said, you can get a bit of applause. But he made a mistake by saying, fancy, I, the Christchurch bear, I made the St. John bear, come and knock the Christchurch bear out the chair. I said, well, that can't work with me, why you make him do it? So I took the thing from the wine, from my chairman after that. And I got up on the platform. Well, it wasn't a platform, it was a platform on the table, because I tried to get order, and I couldn't get the crowd ceasing off. He said that, you know, the crowd bawling and everything. And I said, well, I click order. It was only when they said, sub silencio, or quorum, in other words. For order is heaven's first law. I got order, and if you throw a pin, you could have heard it. And this table was a table in the yard that he said, you know, if I went up on top of it, you had to hear me, right? And see me too. I got profound silence. I said, imagine what this has said this evening. He come down here and sit around church and be able to cheer. I was afraid of information, and I started to give one of my mother's speeches. And before I could get halfway, he came to me and said, sorry sir. I beg to withdraw my remarks. To the audience, I beg to withdraw my remarks. Because I thought I got a land in St. George. But I know I had one here in Christchurch too. And that was it. And by the time I got off the table, I was surrounded with gifts. Who had a pork chop in their hand to give me, had a ice cream, or a sandwich or something. I said, look, I only one person have two hands. I only one mouth.
Many people have forgotten about tea meetings and services of song. Contemporary MCs use some of the elements of the art of speechifier, the quickness of the tongue, the creation and exploitation of the sounding of words, the mimicry of character, and the parody of reality. The performance that has stayed in the memories of the people and has survived into the 21st century is the tuck band, which also evolved out of the instrumental bands from the enslavement period. Wayne Punka Willock is an expert researcher, practitioner, and conservator of tuck.
Now, when the African slaves came over, they could not play their African drums because the plantation owners thought that based on the proximity of various areas, if they were to play their drums, they could communicate with each other in such a way that they could plan a revolt. And so to avoid that type of communication, they banned the use of the African drum on the plantations here in Barbados. And that would be the English. And it was so terrible that a death penalty was attached to anyone caught playing these drums. So as resourceful as we normally are, we had to find a way to express ourselves. Especially on weekends, you finish working hard, you have festive occasions, birthdays and whatnot, and weddings and whatever. And we had to find a way to be able to represent. So what happened is we had the Scottish band years ago on the plantation, and then we had the English regimental band. And in those bands you would have had the kettle drums, or the snare drums as we would call it, and the bass drums in marching band style, and they would have had the other instruments. So what the slaves did was to listen, check out what they were doing, then they set about making similar type drums from indigenous materials, which would then have been like tambourine rods, animal skins, twine, guitar strings, old guitar string, and so on, to make up the kettle drum and the bass drum. And they would play those drums in such a way that it would sound as if they were copying what the marching band guys were doing. But they found the opportunity to inject into that rhythm the African culture and high life where they would have come from. And that mixture is what we now have as indigenous music, is what we now have as what we call tuk band music.
The tuk band was an important component of the traditional celebration of the village for both religious and lay events. In traditional African societies, there was very little division between sacred and secular forms. In fact, they coexisted quite harmoniously. We can see remnants of this worldview in the use of the percussive instruments associated with both. Folk expert Pearson Bellamy, who is associated with establishing the St. John Dramatic and Singing Group, makes very clear links between music of the folk and the churches in the village.
Used to play for the church army.
Okay.
And the Pentecostal church. When they are going out to their meetings, man, these fellas, man, used to make the drum start, man. But not in the sense, not the kind of drum that which you will find that punker plays now.
Okay.
This was one that was made of a barrel, and then you put a goat skin over it. It's a homemade drum.
Okay.
And they play that one, and they will get the blacksmith to make the arms to tighten it and whatnot.
Right.
So, and you'll find those drums mostly, the two drums and the steel were mostly kept by the churches to liven up the service.
Okay. Well, were the tuk bands in St. John as well, though?
No, not only attached to church. No, not as far as I could recall.
It's interesting that music was incorporated by the church.
Yes, yeah. That was part of the worship. Okay. Yeah.
This is in the Pentecostal church.
Pentecostal church. You know, they always say they like the service with the quickening.
Right.
And I understand then that the quickening means that the music has to be lively. Yeah. And they will get in the spirit.
The church was an important social and cultural institution which merged our African and British heritages in very different ways. In some cases, one experience was reinforced over the other, impacting remarkably on artists.
Going to Sunday school in the Christian Mission Church, it was the first place that I saw Joseph Niles in Consolers. And it was awesome. And during those days, we would do recitations at Christmas time and Easter time and harvest time. Church put on programs and we would do recitations. And those were the days still very much steeped in colonialism, where, you know, you will salute before you say your poem or your recitation, and then when you finish your recitation, you salute again, and the girls would bow in courtesy.
I remember at night when they got a revival night and the drums started to lick down. It's bacchanal in there. Is like the banjo that the same way you can't listen. I was saying the banjo in there. And when I peek through, call me now as we looking through the doors, people falling in the power and getting into speaking in tongues, right? Fascinating to me, and a different energy which I then learn after that really and truly what that was. Those late Christian mission churches, I don't know if the right thing to call them, allowed the children of the slaves, which are us, to worship in the way how we accustomed worshiping. We were worshiping before we come across the path with noise and keeping drums called tambourines and drums and I said people get. I never seen anybody get the spirit in a Christian in a church, an England church yet. But yet all these churches wrong here, they had nothing and were all about 4. And you know, and so all those things made me understand, you know, something. There's a natural energy and spirit within us that survive, that's still here. It went nowhere. It just went underground, and then coming out to Kamau with his influence. We talk about the subculture, the underground culture of the Barbadians, and he related to the rivers. That the rivers of Barbados are not on top, the underground. So the culture of Africa and did not disappear. It's still there, but it's subterranean.
For those who experience Tuk music, it is the heartbeat of the nation, the center of who we are as a people. It speaks to our characteristics as Bajans, where forms of protest and resistance are what Brathwaite calls submerged entities.
I don't know if I feeling Tuk and about saying feeling it, but I feel it Tuk and then everything and there's coming back to what Bruce said, we attack people. We walk, talk, eat, and get our attack, right? You know, and just like how I have a love for the Bajan language, I got that same love for Tuk music because I see where the Tuk music come from. The Tuk music in these plantations, the content and Damscom that was informal of youth, you know, the drums was banned. Africans, there were laws in place where African people in Barbados could not even assemble in groups because they didn't want them to participate in that social activity where the dance and the music would keep them fixed consciously to where they came from. So they're trying to break that. And with the drums band, they had an issue with them playing the British marching drum, which is the bass drum and the killer. So you know that ain't got no power, you know. But what our ancestors did was play the rhythms on the British military drums, and that is the Tuk. So when that I understand that Tuk up today is arguably probably my favorite music form up to today.
The distinctive sound of the Tuk is identifiably Bajan for those who know our speech rhythms and the rhythm of our walk. In fact, for some, it is the essence of most Barbadians and a rich source to draw on in the creative process.
On Saturday mornings, Bruce St. John used to come down and give us workshops. And he was I would say he's the first person that made me understand that dialect is another language. And that Bajans is walk, this is his words, is walk and talk the same way. He's the first one that tell me, when you look at it, American is walk and talk their way. Bajans is walk and talk. And he's the first person that put it in perspective, right? And then we start then writing our rhythm poetry, understanding the dynamics of rhythm. So we weren't duplicating our reggae from Jamaica like the dub poets. We weren't doing the rap soul from Trinidad. What Ricky Paris and I would say Hinkson and these people inspired us and Timothy Canada was that we must listen to how the Bajans speak and then sort of write from that perspective. So then it made us connect more with the Tuk because we speak Tuk. And all people don't understand, we speak Tuk, you know, we speak a Tuk language. We gain down the road, dun, 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 dun. So all these things now I relate with phrases, what happened there, man? What happened there, man? What happened there, man? A lot of business don't know that it isn't just speech.
Talking in 4/4.
You understand? You understand? So it's Bruce St. John that showed me. I think he was a master. If you're looking at any poets, Bruce was the master of Bajan language, man. And I learned so much from him. And therefore, my writing just swing. When I learned the voice then, when I read the voice by Kamau, where he said, when you study the sounds of and phrasing of the dialect, Bajan dialect, is really the African language that survived, influenced with the English that was written to us. So that's where you got the w, the f, the da, de, and levy. I transgress a little bit. When I first went to Sierra Leone, right, I thought it was home. I thought I was dreaming because I hearing people saying levy. I said, so waking up somebody talking about levy and that, I thought it was home. They speak just like us, right? And the final, which made me laugh, and my man here laugh too. The final, the big concert for the end of the war in Sierra Leone that they invited me back to perform. The title was The War Done Done. That was the big name, The War Done Done. And I grew up in Rock Hall. That's what we're saying. Things done done. Things done done. Right? You understand? So it was interesting that you know. So I saw dialect then as not a dialect is what come out is national language, is the way how we speak, and the root of it is our African language.
Memories of the Tuck Band and the characters accompanying them are treasured memory for many who lived in the early 20th century. Many might not know it, but the costumed folk figures such as the Shaggy Bear, Tiltman, Mother Sally, and Steel Donkey, whom we associate with the Tuck Band, have deep African roots.
You know what I remember from that is more than the band was the Shaggy Bear. It's made from shag from out of the cane fields. And so it is a crocus bag, and then these shags were tied or sewed onto it, and it's long and loose, more or less like a kaftan. And then the head also, and sometimes a mask, because all of our characters used to wear a mask, which of course was more frightening to a child because you couldn't see the actual face of the person. And that person would jump and turn, but they made, you know, a sound was made by the costume, you know. But there's an art to making it, obviously. But it's exactly like a kaftan, but it's shag, and the underneath would be crocus bag, which again is from the cane fields. So he was a scary character. And I believe it's African in its tradition.
The masked character of the Shaggy Bear reminds some of the West African Igbo Igungun, or a fraternal secret society that revered the ancestors. As we start to think differently about the role that our indigenous art forms can play in the creative process, it also forces us to view with new eyes what those cultural forms actually are and could be. It also leads us to appreciate the possibilities of our folk heritage in new ways. Take, for example, stick licking, an ancient African martial arts form, at the core of which is rhythm, movement, performance, agility, and grace. Stick licking or stick fighting has survived on many of the islands of the Caribbean. However, the style of fighting and ritual that begins the fight is different on each island.
It is a means of self-defense primarily. Primary means of self-defense. It was a form of fighting practice in Africa by several African ethnic groups that came to the Caribbean. The Angolans, about roughly half the enslaved Africans brought to the Atlantic, across the Atlantic, were from Angola, right? And they had a system of stick fighting. A lot of them were cattle herders, and they do stick fighting to defend themselves and sometimes to guide the cattle, right? So the bull would lead the herd, and if you wanted the bull to change direction, they had a way of pelting the stick to just graze in its face and change its direction, that kind of thing. But they fought with the sticks and it was a marker of masculinity and status. So the Angolans, a man would never leave home without his stick, right? It was not only for protection, but it was a status symbol also. And then we had other groups, the Ashanti, the Dahomians, the Igbo, all had their different stick fighting systems. And so when the enslaved Africans came to the Caribbean, it is thought by a lot of people that in such a hostile environment that they found themselves in, one of the cultural activities that they would have preserved would be the self-defense methods, right? You are placed now in a foreign land where with different ethnic groups, you don't understand the language of the people that brought you here, you don't understand the language of the people that you're on the plantation with and everything. So if some people feel, and I agree with them, that they would have clung to certain cultural activities and self-defense would have been a primary one. So I think it was primary self-defense to begin with. And it was also a marker of masculinity. One of the things that happened to male Africans when they came here was that the usual markers of masculinity were denied them. Property, ownership of property, control over your females, your spouse and your children, and things like that were denied the Africans. And we find that generally when you have groups of men who are denied the usual markers of masculinity, they then rely on their bodies to portray their masculinity, and often through sport and often through martial arts.
Although we have moved away from the plantation and village life, many of our indigenous expressions are rooted in its legacy. As resources are spent developing the cultural industries, one should be ever mindful of the peculiarities of Barbadian experiences and develop ways of making the past relevant while a source of creativity and connection.